The Mongol conquest of the Jin dynasty, also known as the Mongol-Jin War, lasted over 23 years, and the Jin dynasty finally fell in 1234, the year that the Mongol Empire had claimed the total conquest of the Jin, thus completing their control of the whole area of northern China. Background: the Jin collected tribute from some of the steppe tribes and encouraged rivalries amongst them. When the Mongols were unified under Kublai Khan in the 12th century, the Jin encouraged the Tatars to destroy them, but the Mongols were able to drive the Jin forces out of their territory. The Tatars eventually captured Kabul's successor Ambahai Khan and handed him over to the Jurchen court, who nailed him to a wooden mule. The Jin forces conducted regular punitive expeditions against the nomads, either enslaving or killing them. In 1210, a delegation arrived at the court of Genghis Khan to proclaim the ascension of a new Jin emperor to the Jurchen throne and demanded the submission of the Mongols as a vassal state. Because the Jurchens defeated the powerful steppe nomads and allied with the Karaits and the Tatars, they claimed sovereignty over all the tribes of the steppe. High court officials of the Jin deserted to the Mongols and urged Genghis Khan to attack the Jin. The biographer of Genghis, Jack Weatherford, describes the Mongol efficacy. The second unique characteristic of the Mongol army was that it traveled without a commissary of cumbersome supply train other than its large reserve of horses that always accompanied the soldiers, but fearful of a trap or some other nefarious scheme, Genghis Khan refused. Upon receiving the order to demonstrate submission, Genghis is reported to have turned to the south and spat on the ground, then he mounted his horse and rode toward the north, leaving the stunned envoy choking in his dust. His defiance of the Jin envoys was tantamount to a declaration of war between the Mongols and the Jurchens. After Genghis Khan returned to Kurline River, in the spring of 1211, he summoned a Kurultai. By organizing a long discussion, everyone in the community was included in the process. Genghis prayed privately on a nearby mountain. He removed his hat and belt, bowed down before the eternal sky, and recounted the generations of grievances his people held against the Jin and detailed the torture and murder of his ancestors. He explained that he had not sought this war against the Jurchens. At the dawn on the fourth day, Genghis emerged with the verdict: "The eternal blue sky has promised us victory and vengeance." Emperor Vaishao Wang of Jin, angry on hearing how Genghis Khan behaved, sent the message to Genghis that, "Our empire is like the sea, yours is but a handful of sand, how can we fear from you?" Mongol conquest under Genghis Khan. When the conquest of Tangut started, there were multiple raids between 1207 to 1209. When the Mongols invaded Jin territory in 1211, Ala Kush, the chief of the Ongut, supported Genghis Khan and showed him a safe road to the heart of Jin. The first important battle between the Mongol Empire and the Jin dynasty was the Battle of the Badger Mouth, a mountain pass in Zhangjiakou, which took place in 1211. There the Jin commander made a tactical mistake in not attacking the Mongols at the first opportunity. Instead, he sent a messenger to the Mongol side, Mingtan, who promptly defected and told the Mongols that the Jin army was waiting on the other side of the pass. At this engagement, fought at Badger Pass, the Mongols massacred thousands of Jin troops. Mongols learned at an early age to always fight on the move. They would pass through towns to draw their opponent away from their animals. When they fell for the Mongol army's trap, the Mongols would kill them and take their animals. While Genghis headed southward, his general Jeba traveled even further east into Manchuria and captured Mukden. However, Genghis Khan was wounded by an arrow in his knee in 1212 after the Mongols returned from their relaxation in the borderlands between Grass and Gobi. The Khitan leader Lukei had declared his allegiance to Genghis in 1212 and freed Manchuria from the Jin. When the Mongol army besieged Zhongdu in 1213, Li Ying, Li Zhong and a few other Jin generals assembled a militia of more than 10,000 men who inflicted several defeats on the Mongols. The Mongols smashed the Jin armies, each numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and broke through Juyongguan Pass and Zijinkou Gap by November 1213. From 1213 through spring 1214, the Mongols pillaged the entire North China plain. In 1214, Genghis Khan surrounded the court of the Golden Khan in Zhongdu, China. The Jin general Haishaliah Shah, who had murdered the Emperor Wanyan Yongji and enthroned his nephew Wanyangzun. When the Mongols besieged the capital, Zhongdu, and the Jin temporarily agreed to become tributary of the Mongols, presenting a Jin princess to Genghis Khan. But when the Mongols withdrew in 1214, believing the war was over after being given a large tribute by the Jin, Li Ying wanted to ambush them on the way with his forces. However, the Jin Emperor Aizong was afraid of offending the Mongols again and stopped him. The emperor and Shu Gaoqi then decided to shift the capital south to Kaifeng, above the objections of many courtiers including Li Ying. From then on, the Jin were strictly on the defensive and Zhongdu fell to the Mongols in 1215. By 1215, under Mongol pressure, the Jin were forced to move the capital south from Beijing to Kaifeng, where the Mongols extinguished the Jin dynasty in 1234. After the shift of the Jin capital to Kaifeng, Prime Minister Wanyan Chengui and General Moran Jinzhong were left to guard Zhongdu. At this point, one of the Jin armies defected to the Mongols and launched an attack on Zhongdu from the south, taking the Lugo Bridge. Genghis Khan then dispatched his troops to attack Zhongdu again, led by the surrendered Khitan generals Shimominga, Yeluahai, and the Tuhua brothers. Moran Jinzhong's second-in-command, Puchakijin, surrendered to the Mongols with all the troops under him, throwing Zhongdu into crisis. The Jin emperor then sent reinforcements north. Yongxi leading the troops from Zhending and Zhongshan, and Wagyiling Kungshao leading 18,000 imperial guards, 11,000 infantry and cavalry from the southwestern route, and 10,000 soldiers from Hebei, with Li Ying in charge of the supply train. Zhongdu fell to the Mongols on May 31, 1215. Then they systematically rooted out all resistance in Shanxi, Hebei and Shandong from 1217 to 23. Fortunately for the Jin, Genghis turned his attention to another event in Central Asia and Persia. When Shu Gaoqi was in control of the imperial court in 1217, he foolishly decided to invade the southern Song for the first time in nearly 30 years. This war lasted until 1224 and was a total failure for the Jin. In 1219, Botawi Tarhun, a women chief, took one of Genghis Khan's Mongol troop captive and sent one of his trusted general, with help of a small group of well-knowledgeable soldiers, to find out what happened. In 1224, the Wanyan Shou declared that the Jin would never again invade the Song. But the damage had already been done. The Jin forces had been split between north and south at a critical stage in the war with the Mongols when Zhongdu, Hebei and Shandong had fallen and Shanxi was being attacked. Many Khitan mercenaries left the Jurchen armies and joined Genghis Khan. Mukhali's advance in 1223. The Mongol general Mukhali had struck into Shaanxi, attacking Chang'an when Chinggis was campaigning in Khorasan. The garrison in Chang'an, 200,000 under Wanyan Heda, was too strong and Mukhali had to turn to besieging Fengxian with 100,000 men. The siege dragged on for months and the Mongols were harassed by local militia, while Jin reinforcements were about to arrive. Mukhali then died of illness, and the Mongols retreated. This was the siege in which the Shi'er troops supporting the Mongols gave up and went home, incurring the wrath of Genghis Khan. In the wars against the Mongols, therefore, the Jin relied heavily on subjects or allies like the Uyghurs, Tanguts and Khitans to supply cavalry. Han Chinese defectors. Many Han Chinese and Khitan defected to the Mongols to fight against the Jin. Two Han Chinese leaders, Shi Tians, Lu Haima, and the Khitan Xiozhala defected and commanded the 3 Tumans in the Mongol army. Lu Haima and Shi Tian served Ogode Khan. Lu Haima and Shi Tian led armies against Western Xia for the Mongols. There were 4 Han tumans and 3 Khitan tumans, with each tuman consisting of 10,000 troops. The 3 Khitan generals Shimobade, Tabaya, and Shaojisai's Hizai Zhongxi, 4 Han generals Zhang Ru, Jianxi, Shi Tians, and Lu Haima commanded the 4 Han tumans under Ogode Khan. Shi Tians was a Han Chinese who lived in the Jin dynasty. Interethnic marriage between Han and Jurchen became common at this time. His father was Shi Bingji. Shi Bingji was married to a Jurchen woman and a Han Chinese woman. It is unknown which of them was Shi Tians' mother. Shi Tians was married to 2 Jurchen women, a Han Chinese woman, and a Korean woman, and his son Shigang was born to one of his Jurchen wives. His Jurchen wives' surnames were Mo9 and Naho, his Korean wife's surname was Li, and his Han Chinese wife's surname was Shi. Shi Tians defected to the Mongol Empire's forces upon their invasion of the Jin dynasty. His son Shigang married a Karaite woman. The Karaite were Mongolified Turkic people and considered as part of the Mongol nation. Shi Tians, Zhang Ru, and Yanxi and other high-ranking Chinese who served in the Jin dynasty and defected to the Mongols helped build the structure for the administration of the new state. The Yuan dynasty created a Han army out of defected Jin troops, an army of defected Song troops called the newly submitted army. Mongol conquest under Ogode Khan. When Ogode ascended the throne, he rebuffed Jin offers of peace talks. The Jin officers murdered Mongol envoys. The Kashi commander Dokka was dispatched to attempt a frontal attack on Tongguan Pass, but Wanyanheda defeated him and forced Subutai to withdraw in 1230. In 1231, the Mongols attacked again and finally took Fengxiang. The Jin garrison in Shanghai panicked and abandoned the city, pulling back to Henan with all the city's population. 1 month later, the Mongols decided to use a 3-pronged attack to converge on Kaifeng from north, east and west. The western force under Tolua would start from Fengxiang, enter the Tong Pass, and then pass through Song territory at the Han River to re-emerge south of Kaifeng to catch the Jin by surprise. Wanyanheda learned of this plan and led 200,000 men to intercept Tolua. At Dengzhou, he set an ambush in a valley with several tens of thousands of cavalry hidden behind the crest of either mountain. But Tolua's spies alerted him and he kept his main force with the supply train, sending only a smaller force of light cavalry to skirt around the valley and attack the Jin troops from behind. Wanyanheda saw that his plan had been foiled and prepared his troops for a Mongol assault. At Mount Yu, southwest of Dengzhou, the two armies met in a pitched battle. The Jin army had an advantage in numbers, and fought fiercely. The Mongols then withdrew from Mount Yu by about 30 li, and Tolua changed his strategy, leaving a part of his force to keep Wanyanheda occupied. He sent most of his men to strike northwards at Kaifeng in several dispersed contingents to avoid alerting Heda. On the way from Dengzhou to Kaifeng, the Mongols easily took county after county, and burned all the supplies they captured so as to cut off Wanyanheda's supply lines. Heda was forced to withdraw, and ran into the Mongols at Three-Peaked Hill in Zhengzhou. At this point, the Jin troops on the Yellow River were also diverted southwards to meet Tolua's attack, and the Mongol northern force under Khan Ogode seized this opportunity to cross the frozen river and join up with Tolua. Even at this point, their combined strength was only about 50,000. By 1232 the Jin emperor was besieged in his capital of Kaifeng. They together smashed the Jin forces. Ogode soon departed, leaving the final conquest to his generals. The fall of the Jin dynasty. Wanyanheda's Jin army still had more than 100,000 men after the battle at Mount Yu, and the Mongols adopted a strategy of exhausting the enemy. The Jin troops had little rest all the way from Dengzhou, and had not eaten for 3 days because of the severing of their supply lines. Their morale was plummeting and their commanders were losing confidence. When they reached Three-Peaked Hill, a snowstorm suddenly broke out, and it was so cold that the faces of the Jin troops went as white as corpses, and they could hardly march. Rather than attack them when they were desperate with their backs to the wall, the Mongols left them an escape route and then ambushed them when they let down their guard during the retreat. The Jin army collapsed without a fight, and the Mongols pursued the fleeing Jin troops relentlessly. Wanyan Heda was killed, and most of his commanders also lost their lives. After the Battle of Three-Peaked Hill, Kaifeng was doomed and the Jin emperor soon abandoned the city and entered Hebei in a vain attempt to re-establish himself there. Thousands of people offered a stubborn resistance to the Mongols, who entrusted the conduct of the attack to Subutai, the most daring of all their commanders. The Jin emperor was driven south again, and by this time Kaifeng had been taken by the Mongols, so he established his new capital at Kaizhou. Subutai wished to massacre the whole of the population, but fortunately for the Khitan, Yeluchukai was more humane, and under his advice Ogedei rejected the cruel proposal. The Chinese used fire arrows against the Mongols during the defense of Kaifeng in 1232. The Mongols adopted this weapon in later conquests. In 1233, after Wanyan Shou had abandoned Kaifeng and failed to raise a new army for himself in Hebei, he returned to Henan and established his base in Gida. Scattered Jin armies began to gather at Gida from the surrounding region and Hebei, and the supplies in the city could no longer feed all these soldiers. Thus Wanyan Shou left only 450 Han Chinese troops under Commander-in-Chief Pucha Guanu and 280 men under Commander Ma Yong to guard the city, and dispersed the rest of the troops to forage in Su, Zhu, and Chen. Pucha Guanwu then launched a coup with his troops, killing Ma Yong and more than 300 other courtiers, as well as about 3,000 officers, palace guards and civilians who refused to cooperate with him. He made the emperor his puppet and became the real master of the imperial court. At this point the Mongols had arrived outside Gida and were preparing to besiege the city. The Mongol general Sajasai Burwa had set up camp north of the city, on the bank of a river. Guanwu then led his 450 troops out on boats from the southern gate at night, armed with fire lances. They rode along the river by the eastern side of the city, reaching the Mongol camp early in the morning. Wanyan Shou watched the battle from the northern gate of the city, with his imperial boat prepared for him to flee to Zhuzhou if the Jin troops were defeated. The Jin troops assaulted the Mongol camp from two directions, using their fire lances to throw the Mongols into a panic. More than 3,500 Mongols drowned in the river while trying to flee, and the Mongol stockades were all burned to the ground. Sajasai Burwa was also killed in the battle. Guanwu had achieved a remarkable victory and was promoted by the emperor, but Gida was not defensible in the long term, and the other courtiers urged the emperor to move to Kaizhou, which had stronger walls and more provisions and troops. Pucha Guanwu opposed the move, afraid that his power base would be weakened and arguing that Kaizhou's advantages had been overstated. 3 months later, Wanyan Shou used a plot to assassinate Guanwu, and then quickly began preparations to move to Kaizhou. By the time new reports reached him that Kaizhou was still too weak in defenses, troops and supplies, he was already on the way there. The fate of the Jin dynasty was then sealed for good, despite the earlier victory against great odds at Gida. The remainder of the Jurchen army, under their sovereign Ninkiasu, took shelter in Kaizhou, where they were closely besieged by the Mongols on one side and the Song on the other. Driven thus into a corner, the Jins fought with the courage of despair and long held out against the combined efforts of their enemies. At last Ninkiasu saw that the struggle could not be prolonged, and he prepared himself to end his life. When the enemy broke into the city, he heard the stormers at the gate of his palace. Wanyan Shou committed suicide, and the Jin dynasty was finally destroyed. He retired to an upper chamber and set fire to the building. Many of his generals, and even of his soldiers, followed his example, preferring to end their existence rather than to add to the triumph of their Mongol and Song opponents. Thus came to an end in 1234 the famous dynasty of the Jurchens.